Sophie had always been an independent and determined woman. At 35, she had built a solid career as a project manager in a large technology company. Her days were filled with meetings, deadlines, and the constant pressure to deliver results. With brown hair always tied in an elegant bun and piercing eyes, Sophie emanated an aura of professionalism and competence. Her routine was meticulously planned. She would wake up at 6 a.m., take a quick run in the park near her apartment, have a hearty coffee and be at the office before 8 a.m. Evenings were usually dedicated to reviewing reports or planning strategies for the next day. Weekends? Rarely moments of leisure. Sophie lived for work, convinced that her worth was directly linked to her productivity. The apartment where she lived was a reflection of her personality, organized, minimalist, and functional. The white walls were decorated with a few abstract paintings, chosen more for their aesthetic value than any emotional connection. The kitchen, impeccably clean, was rarely used beyond making coffee and quick meals. Sophie did not have many close friends. Her relationships were limited to co-workers and a few long-time acquaintances with whom she kept sporadic contact. Loneliness, however, never seemed to bother her. On the contrary, she valued her independence and the control she had over her life. Her family history was always a delicate subject. Sophie knew she was adopted from a young age. Agnes, her adoptive mother, a sweet and caring lady, never hid this fact. But the circumstances of her adoption were always nebulous. Agnes used to say that Sophie had come to her as a gift, but she never went into details about the process or about her biological parents. Growing up knowing she was adopted shaped Sophie's personality in subtle but profound ways. She developed a constant need to prove her worth, as if she needed to justify her existence. This was reflected in her almost obsessive dedication to work and her difficulty in forming deep emotional bonds. Sophie's life followed its predictable course until that fateful Thursday. The day began like any other. The morning run, the hurried breakfast, the commute to the office. But upon arriving, she was called into an unexpected meeting with her boss and the human resources director. The news dropped like a bombshell. The company was undergoing restructuring and her position had been eliminated. Sophie, always so composed, felt the ground disappear beneath her feet. She tried to argue to show her worth, but the decision had already been made. With a generous severance package and letters of recommendation, Sophie was gently escorted out of the building that had been her second home for so many years. The days that followed were a blur of conflicting emotions. Sophie oscillated between anger, frustration, and a feeling of emptiness she had never experienced before. Her routine, so carefully constructed, crumbled. The mornings now dragged on endlessly. The nights once dedicated to work were now long and lonely. It was on one of those nights that Sophie, unable to sleep and tired of the oppressive silence of her apartment, did something she hadn't done in years. She turned on the television. She wasn't really interested in watching anything specific. She just wanted some background noise, something to fill the emptiness that seemed to grow each day. Flipping through the channels, she stopped at a variety show. It was a segment about family reunions, stories of people separated by life circumstances who, years later, found each other again. Sophie was about to change the channel when a sentence made her stop. "Michael is looking for his sister who has been missing for over 30 years. Something in that sentence caught her attention. And then, the image that would change her life forever appeared on the screen. An old photo, yellowed with time. In it, a couple smiled next to a boy of about 8 years old. Between them was a little girl, no more than 4 years old, with big green eyes and brown hair. Sophie's heart stopped. That little girl was her. There was no doubt. The same eyes, the same shy smile that she saw in her childhood photos. But those people, she didn't know them. She had never seen them before. With trembling hands, Sophie turned up the volume on the TV. The report continued, telling the story of Michael, a middle-aged man who had spent his life searching for his younger sister. According to him, their parents had died in an accident when they were children. Without close relatives, the siblings were separated and placed for adoption. Michael was adopted quickly, but he never knew what happened to his sister. Sophie could barely breathe. Her mind was racing, trying to process what she was seeing and hearing. Was it possible? Could she be that girl? Did she have a family, a brother, that she never knew existed? The program ended, but Sophie remained motionless, staring at the now dark screen. 1,000 questions arose in her mind. Why had her adoptive mother, Agnes, never mentioned a brother? Was there more to her story that she didn't know? With trembling hands, Sophie picked up her phone. She wanted to call Agnes immediately, to demand answers. But something held her back. It was late at night, and her mother, already very elderly, was probably asleep. Besides, Sophie didn't know if she was ready to hear the answers she might receive. She spent the night awake, tossing and turning in bed, her mind a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions. In the morning, she decided she needed more information before asking Agnes. She called the TV station, asking for details about the program and how to contact Michael. The days that followed were an emotional roller coaster for Sophie. She swung between hope and fear, between curiosity and apprehension. What if it was all a misunderstanding? What if she discovered a truth she would rather not know? Finally, after a week of indecision, Sophie gathered her courage and dialed the number provided by the broadcaster. With her heart pounding, she listened as the phone rang once, twice, 3 times. Then a male voice answered, "Hello?" Sophie took a deep breath. "My name is Sophie. I think I'm the person you're looking for." The silence on the other end of the line seemed to last an eternity. Then Michael's voice, choked with emotion, responded, "Sophie, my God, is that really you?" The conversation that followed was intense and emotional. Michael told Sophie everything he knew about their past. He talked about how they had been separated after the tragic death of their parents. He spoke about how he grew up knowing he had a sister somewhere, and how he dedicated a large part of his life to looking for her. Sophie listened to everything with a mixture of fascination and disbelief. It was as if she was hearing someone else's story, not her own. But as Michael spoke, long-buried memories began to resurface. Flashes of a different house, of smiling faces, of an older boy playing with her. By the end of the call, they agreed to meet in person. Sophie was nervous but also strangely excited. For the first time in weeks, she felt she had a purpose, something to look forward to. The day of the meeting arrived. Sophie chose a quiet cafe in the city centre. She arrived early, her stomach a knot of nerves. She sat at a table near the window, anxiously watching every person who passed by. And then, she saw him. A middle-aged man, grey hair at the temples, green eyes identical to hers. He stopped at the entrance of the cafe, looking around until their eyes met. In that moment, Sophie knew. There was no doubt. This was her brother. They looked very much alike. Michael approached slowly, as if he feared she might disappear. When he reached the table, they both remained silent for a moment, just looking at each other, recognizing familiar features in one another. It was Sophie who broke the silence. "Hello, Michael," she said softly. His voice trembled slightly as he replied, "Hello, Sophie." They smiled shyly at each other, and then, as if moved by an invisible force, they hugged. It was a long hug, full of restrained emotion, of years of absence and unacknowledged longing. When they parted, both had tears in their eyes. They sat and talked for hours. Michael brought photos, documents, memories of a life that Sophie didn't know. But that was hers. He told her about their parents, about what they were like as a family before the tragedy. Sophie listened to everything with fascination, feeling as if pieces of a long, incomplete puzzle were finally fitting together. She talked about her life with Agnes, about how she grew up happy, but always feeling that something was missing. As they talked, Sophie felt a connection growing between them. It wasn't just the physical resemblance or the shared stories. It was something deeper, a sense of belonging she had never experienced before. At the end of the meeting, they agreed to see each other again. Michael wanted to introduce her to his family, the wife and children who never knew they had an aunt. Sophie, in turn, wanted Michael to meet Agnes, the woman who raised her and loved her like a daughter. In the days and weeks that followed, Sophie felt her life transform. The void left by losing her job was filled with something far more significant. She discovered a new part of herself, a story she didn't know but had always been a part of her. Gradually, Sophie began to reassess her priorities. Work, which once consumed all her time and energy, now seemed less important. She started to spend more time getting to know her new family, strengthening her ties with Michael, and exploring this new facet of her identity. The process was not easy. There were moments of doubt, fear, and even guilt, especially concerning her mother Agnes. But over time, Sophie learned that love is not something limited. Having a brother and a new family did not in any way diminish the love and gratitude she felt for her adoptive mother. Months after that first meeting, Sophie found herself at a family gathering. She was surrounded by people who not long ago were strangers, but who were now an integral part of her life. Michael, his wife, his children, and even Agnes, who was warmly welcomed by everyone. Looking around, Sophie felt a wave of emotion wash over her. She realized that throughout her life there had been a part of her waiting for this moment, even without knowing it. The lost girl in the photo, Emily, had finally found her way back home. That night, lying in her bed, Sophie reflected on how her life had changed. The job loss, which initially seemed like a tragedy, had turned out to be the catalyst for the greatest discovery of her life. She smiled, thinking about how destiny works in mysterious ways. Sophie fell asleep with a sense of peace and completeness that she had never experienced before. She knew there was still much to discover, much to learn about her history and her family. But now, for the first time, she felt she truly belonged to something bigger than herself. And that, more than any professional achievement, was what really mattered. If you enjoyed the story, please leave a comment with a rating from 1 to 5 to show how much you liked it. Also, watch the video that is now appearing on your screen. See you soon.